Confirmation this week that the national minimum wage is being moved up by just under 7% to 23 Rand and 19 cents an hour. If I've done the maths on my cell phone calculator correctly, that's quite a big if. If you work for 8 hours a day, for 5 days a week, and you're on the national minimum wage, you would earn 927 Rand and 60 cents a week. It's not very much money to live on. But as always, when the minimum wage goes up, some companies worry they may not be able to pay workers the new wage. Jéandie Leone is a commercial executive at Workforces Staffing. Jéandie, good afternoon to you, and thank you very much indeed for your time. This increase is just above inflation. Inflation, I think, is going to creep up, but still, this is just above inflation. What impact is it going to have on workers? It will make a tiny bit of a difference?
Yes, thank you, Stephen. I think the impact on workers will generally be positive. I think we're in an economic state where workers have felt the pinch in terms of increased living costs, particularly increased costs in transport. With the COVID pandemic, a lot of extra costs and job losses. So I do think that this is a positive direction in assisting employees in the job market and also stimulating some spending in our economy, which is obviously very important for economic growth as well.
Do we actually have official figures for how many workers are on a minimum wage? And working that out can sometimes be complicated. There have been exemptions for domestic workers and farm workers. That's changed lately. But do we actually have a hard figure how many people are on a minimum wage? And I mean, it's also about enforcement, isn't it?
That's correct, yes. So most people on the minimum wage will fall outside of your domestic worker and farm categories. Obviously, our latest figures will include these categories as they are now on par with the minimum wage. But we're looking at the majority of our working class or our people in the job market actually being on the minimum wage. And the estimates at this stage is between 7 and 8 million.
It's a large number of people. Whenever we have an increase in the national minimum wage, and it is an annual thing, there's always a little bit of sort of tension around this. There's some companies who claim that they can't now afford to pay workers, and they say they'll have to lay people off. I mean, should we believe them when they say that? I know it depends on sectors.
Yes, I think that that's a correct assessment in some respects. Obviously, it will depend from one industry to the next. And fluctuations in demands for their products and services. But I do think that, job cuts and mass retrenchments are sometimes a knee-jerk reaction when we see an increase in the national minimum wage. And there's a few factors around that we must also keep in mind. The first thing is that the minimum wage was introduced in 2019 already. So this did provide opportunity for businesses to assess their resources and scale, according to their genuine operational requirements. And historically, businesses operated with inefficient workforces at a very high cost. And on an individual level, employees earned low wages and faced exploitation. So where businesses did not use this opportunity pre-2019 to optimize their labor costs, the pandemic created a further opportunity in 2020 where businesses had to see firsthand that market conditions can change overnight and that they have to operate smarter. So where a business regularly does a cost-benefit analysis across its operations, wage increases will not have an unbearable impact on their operations because they foresee it, they can budget for it, and labor resources will be scaled appropriately. How the national minimum wage actually stimulates employment is through workers being incentivized to actually enter the job market because a decent wage covers the minimum cost of living. And as I've mentioned, there's been a tremendous increase in the cost of living recently, especially with transport, and a welfare income might make more sense to a worker that doesn't earn enough. So it might be true that it may lead to job losses, but I do think that it can also encourage businesses to look at non-wage avenues to save costs. So instead of directly going to job cuts, perhaps businesses can look at other methods of absorbing that increase, such as raising their prices or looking at infrastructure spend versus necessity, and also alternative employment models that's focused on productivity output to boost productivity of their workforce.
The next question, of course, is this all only works if the Labour Department actually enforces it. Now, I know some workers will be able to phone the Labour Department and say, please send an inspector. But if you don't enforce it, people are going to get away with it. If you don't have enough inspectors, people are going to get away with it. If you're in a far-flung place where the nearest Labour office is 500 kilometres away, well, you're probably not too worried about a raid. Do we actually enforce this properly?
We have seen an increase in enforcement from the Department of Labour. It obviously did slow down during 2020 with the lockdown and restrictions on travelling and people in the office and so on. But we do see an increased focus from the Department of Labour to enforce the national minimum wage. In our business, we've also seen an increase from CCMA statistics, from workers referring disputes to the CCMA, where they feel that the national minimum wage is not being adhered to. And of course, on the flip side, there's an option for businesses to apply for an exemption in terms of the Act, rather than wait for, a dispute to be lodged against them and being penalised by the Department of Labour.
Jéandie Leone, thank you, Commercial Executive at Workforces Staffing. Do appreciate it, an important story to remember this week.